Chris Benoit, the shocking tragedy. Chris Benoit was one of the most respected wrestlers in WWE history. Known for his incredible technical skills, he won many championships, including the World Heavyweight title. But behind his success, there was a dark side that very few people knew about. Benoit was famous for his flying headbutt, a move where he would jump from the top rope and slam his head into his opponent. It looked amazing, but it came at a huge cost. Over the years, Benoit took this dangerous move hundreds of times, and each time, his head hit the mat with full force. This caused severe head injuries that no one knew about until it was too late. In 2007, something happened that shocked the entire world. Benoit was involved in a tragic incident that took the lives of his wife, Nancy, and their 7-year-old son, Daniel. What made this even more heartbreaking was that Benoit was known as a quiet and dedicated family man. Here's something you might not know. Doctors later discovered that Benoit's brain was severely damaged, almost like that of an 85-year-old Alzheimer's patient. This damage likely played a big role in the tragic events that unfolded. Another hidden fact: Benoit was supposed to win the ECW championship just days after the incident. WWE had big plans for him, but everything changed in the worst way possible. This story is a reminder of how dangerous the wrestling business can be and how important it is to take care of the people who entertain us. Rey Mysterio, the masked hero and a tragic moment. Rey Mysterio is one of the most beloved wrestlers in WWE history. With his high-flying moves, colorful masks, and never-give-up attitude, he became a hero to millions, especially kids. Kids loved him not just for his exciting matches, but also because he always played fair and stood up for what was right. Rey's famous move, the 619, became his signature. It's a move where he uses the ropes to swing like a superhero and kick his opponent in the face. Fans would go wild every time he set it up. But in 1998, during a match in Mexico, something went terribly wrong. Rey was wrestling Perro Aguayo Jr., and the match was going smoothly until a routine move turned tragic. Perro suffered a severe injury and sadly passed away. What makes this even more heartbreaking is that Rey was setting up for his famous 619 move when the accident happened. Here's something few people know. Rey's mask isn't just for show, it represents honor and legacy in Mexican wrestling. After the incident, he wore it with even more pride, dedicating his matches to those who inspired him, including Perro. Wrestling's darkest secrets are finally being revealed. Subscribe now before they get buried forever. Also, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to give you a shout out. The Great Khali, a past stained by two tragedies. The Great Khali, standing at a towering 7 feet 1 inch, was one of the most intimidating wrestlers in WWE history. But behind his towering presence was a past filled with darkness. 2 people lost their lives because of him. Before stepping into the wrestling world, Khali worked as a police officer in India. With his massive strength, he was assigned to handle dangerous criminals. One day during an operation, he tried to stop a suspect, but things got out of control. Khali's strength, which was supposed to restrain the man, became the reason he never got back up. The suspect was dead. It was ruled an accident, but whispers followed Khali. Did he use too much force? Could the man have survived? Those questions never got answers. But one thing was clear: Khali didn't belong there anymore. He left his badge behind and set his sights on wrestling, thinking he could escape the past. But his past wasn't done with him. In 2001, while training at All Pro Wrestling, he was paired with a young wrestler named Brian Ong. The two were practicing the flapjack move, a common maneuver where one wrestler lifts the other and drops them onto the mat. It should have been routine. But this time, something went terribly wrong. Brian landed head first. The impact was brutal. His body stiffened for a moment, then stopped moving altogether. Khali had seen a man die before, and now it was happening again. Medics rushed in, but there was no saving Brian. He was gone. The effect was immediate. Wrestlers refused to train or fight with Khali. No one wanted to step in the ring with a man who had been involved in not 1, but 2 deaths. He was seen as a danger, a walking risk. For a long time, he disappeared from the wrestling world. But when he returned, WWE introduced him as the Great Khali, an unstoppable force. a monster. But behind that character was something else, a past that would never let go. Lex Luger, the fall of a wrestling icon. Lex Luger was once the perfect image of a wrestling superstar, muscular, confident, and larger than most men in the ring. But behind the spotlight, his life was far from perfect. His story isn't just about championships and fame, it's about a night that changed everything. By the early 2000s, Luger's life was spiraling out of control. His career was fading, and he was battling personal demons. But it was April 30th, 2003, that left a permanent stain on his name. That night, Luger made a call to 911. His voice was panicked. The person on the other end of the line was Miss Elizabeth, the legendary WWE manager and former partner of Randy Savage. She was unresponsive. When paramedics arrived, they found her unconscious in Luger's townhouse. They did everything they could, but she never woke up. The investigation quickly turned to Luger. Authorities searched his home and found illegal substances, painkillers, and steroids. He was arrested and faced serious legal trouble. Though he wasn't charged directly in Elizabeth's death, his reputation was destroyed. The wrestling world turned its back on him, and his life took a downward spiral. Soon, the once great wrestler was a shadow of his former self. His body broke down, and by 2007, he was confined to a wheelchair due to spinal cord damage. The man who once called himself the total package had lost everything: his career, his fame, and the people closest to him. Some names in wrestling are remembered for their achievements. Lex Luger is remembered for something else: Jimmy Snuka, a mystery that haunted him forever. Jimmy Snuka was one of WWE's most electrifying high flyers, but outside the ring, his life was surrounded by something much darker, a real-life tragedy that followed him for decades. The year was 1983. Snuka was at a Pennsylvania motel with his girlfriend, Nancy Argentino. Hours later, Nancy was found unresponsive, covered in bruises, with a severe head injury. Snuka claimed she had simply fallen and hit her head, but the autopsy told a different story. Doctors believed her injuries were no accident. Despite the suspicious circumstances, Snuka was never charged. His wrestling career continued, and WWE never spoke about the incident. But whispers never stopped. Did Snuka know more than he admitted? Was there a hidden truth that no one wanted to face? For over 30 years, the case remained unsolved. But in 2015, everything changed. Authorities reopened the investigation, and Snuka was charged with involuntary manslaughter. By then, however, Snuka's health was failing. He was diagnosed with dementia, and doctors claimed he wasn't mentally fit to stand trial. In 2017, just days after the case was dismissed, Snuka passed away. The truth about that night in 1983 died with him. Did Jimmy Snuka carry a secret to his grave? The world may never know. Bruiser Brody, the betrayal that ended in blood. Bruiser Brody was a beast in the ring, wild, unpredictable, and feared by everyone who faced him. But it wasn't just his in-ring persona that made people uneasy. His real-life attitude made enemies, and one of them wanted him gone forever. It was July 16th, 1988, in Puerto Rico. Brody had traveled there for a match, but he never made it to the ring. Inside the locker room, something horrifying happened. Fellow wrestler Jose Gonzalez, known as Invader Fern, called Brody aside to talk business. Moments later, wrestlers heard screams. When they rushed in, they found Brody clutching his stomach, blood pouring from his body. He had been stabbed, not by a stranger, but by another wrestler. Gonzalez stood there, the weapon still in his hands. Brody was rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. The monster of the ring was gone. What happened next shocked everyone. Gonzalez claimed self-defense. The trial that followed was nothing short of a cover-up. Witnesses never got their court summons, and the jury believed Gonzalez's story. He walked free. Brody's death wasn't just a tragedy, it was a message. In the world of wrestling, enemies weren't just made in the ring. Sometimes they were waiting for you in the locker room, knife in hand. New Jack. Violence didn't stay in the ring. New Jack wasn't just a wrestler, he was chaos in human form. His matches weren't performances. They were real, bloody brawls. He didn't care about rules, and he definitely didn't care about his opponents. But one night, he crossed a line even he couldn't walk back from. In 1996, during an ECW event, New Jack faced a 17-year-old wrestler named Mass Transit. The kid had lied about his experience, claiming he was trained. But New Jack didn't care. What happened next left the audience in shock. New Jack pulled out a surgical blade. Not a wrestling prop, a real blade. He sliced Mass Transit's forehead open, deep enough to expose muscle. Blood poured everywhere. The kid screamed, but New Jack laughed. He whispered, "I don't care if you die." The wound needed over 50 stitches. The kid passed out from blood loss. New Jack was arrested, but a jury let him walk free. He didn't feel remorse. He even joked about it in interviews, saying he'd do it again. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a gimmick. This was New Jack. And for the rest of his career, wrestlers knew stepping in the ring with him wasn't just dangerous, it was life-threatening. Billy Jack Haynes. A confession too late. Some wrestlers hide their dark past. Billy Jack Haynes didn't just admit to his, he embraced it. His career in the ring was violent, but what he claimed to have done outside of it was far worse. For years, Haynes was known as a hot-headed, unpredictable wrestler. But in 2018, he made a confession that shook everyone, one that had nothing to do with wrestling. He claimed that back in 1987, he was involved in a tragic incident that led to the deaths of two teenagers. The case was already infamous. Kevin Ives and Don Henry, two Arkansas teens, were found lifeless on train tracks. Authorities called it an accident, but rumors spread, whispers of drugs, corruption, and a hidden truth. Then decades later, Haynes came forward with his own story. He claimed he had worked as a hitman and that he had been there the night the boys lost their lives. According to him, they had seen something they weren't supposed to, and powerful people wanted them silenced. Haynes claimed he played a role in what happened next. But was he telling the truth, or was this just another shocking tale from a man who thrived on attention? No charges were ever filed, and the case remains unsolved. What's more terrifying, a man who commits a crime, or a man who confesses decades later, knowing nothing can be done about it? Ox Baker, the man with the deadliest move. Ox Baker looked like a nightmare, a towering figure with a thick mustache and wild eyes. But it wasn't his appearance that made him terrifying. It was the belief that his hands had caused real deaths in the ring. Baker was famous for his move, the heart punch, a brutal strike to the chest. It was supposed to be just another wrestling move, but in the 1970s, things took a dark turn. In 1971, Alberto Torres faced Ox Baker in the ring. After the match, Torres collapsed. Doctors later confirmed he suffered from a ruptured pancreas. A year later, in 1972, Ray Gunkel stepped into the ring with Baker. He never made it out alive. Gunkel suffered a heart attack after the match, and once again, all eyes turned to Baker's deadly move. Fans started to believe Baker's heart punch was more than just wrestling. It was dangerous. Crowds began chanting, "You ended him! You ended him!" Wherever he went. Did Ox Baker really cause these tragedies, or was he just at the center of horrible coincidences? No one could prove it, but the fear surrounding him never faded. Vern Gagne, the wrestling legend with a dark end. Vern Gagne was a respected figure in wrestling, a former champion, a promoter, and a trainer of legends. But in the final years of his life, he became known for something far more tragic. By the 2000s, Gagne was suffering from severe memory loss due to years of wrestling injuries. He was living in a care facility when, in 2009, a shocking incident took place. Gagne, who was 82 years old at the time, had an altercation with his 97-year-old roommate, Helmut Gutmann, a man suffering from dementia. What happened next was disturbing. Gagne, despite his frail state, grabbed Gutmann and threw him to the floor. The impact was devastating. Gutmann suffered a severe head injury and was rushed to the hospital. Weeks later, he passed away. But here's where things get even darker. Gagne was never charged. Due to his medical condition, authorities ruled that he wasn't responsible for his actions. He never even remembered what he had done. A man who once controlled the ring couldn't even control his own mind. And in the end, his legacy became overshadowed by the one thing he could never fight: time. Brian Michael McGee, from the ring to a dark path. Some wrestlers live for fame. Brian Michael McGee will always be remembered for something far more disturbing. His wrestling career never reached the heights of WWE Legends, but his story took a turn that left people shocked. McGee wrestled under the name The Future in the early 2000s, working in smaller promotions and even making brief appearances in WWE's developmental system. But his career never took off. By 2013, he was out of wrestling, and his life had spiraled into chaos. Then in July 2013, everything changed. McGee's social media sent out a chilling message, a cryptic post with a disturbing image. Moments later, authorities were chasing him down after reports of a tragic incident involving his ex-girlfriend. He led police on a high-speed chase before finally being caught. When the dust settled, the wrestling world realized this was no storyline. This was real. A man who once dreamed of superstardom had thrown it all away in a single night. Now, instead of being remembered for championship belts or legendary matches, McGee's name is linked to a crime that can never be undone. Scott Hall, a past that never let go. Before he became a wrestling icon, Scott Hall's life took a dark turn that he could never escape. Long before WWE, long before the lights and cameras, he was just a young man working at a nightclub in Florida. It was 1983, and Hall was a bartender at the original Dollhouse, a club in Orlando. One night, a heated argument broke out between him and a customer. The fight wasn't just about words, it was about a woman. Tensions flared, and soon the man stormed outside and smashed the windows of Hall's car. Hall confronted him, and what happened next would haunt him for the rest of his life. A struggle broke out, a gun was drawn, and in the chaos, a .45 caliber bullet was fired. The man didn't survive. Scott Hall was arrested, but he claimed it was self-defense. With no clear evidence proving otherwise, the case was dropped. But the guilt never left him. Even after he became famous as Razor Ramon, even after winning championships, the memory of that night followed him. Hall later admitted that the incident destroyed him inside, leading him down a path of substance abuse and self-destruction. He may have left wrestling behind, but that night in 1983 never left him. Juana Barraza, the wrestler with a dark secret. Wrestling fans knew her as La Dama del Silencio, the Lady of Silence. But outside the ring, Juana Barraza led a life far darker than anyone could have imagined. Born in Mexico, Barraza had a troubled past. She didn't just wrestle in the ring, she played a deadly game in real life. Between the late 1990s and early 2000s, elderly women across Mexico City started disappearing under chillingly similar circumstances. The authorities were puzzled, unable to connect the dots. No one suspected that a professional wrestler was behind it all. By day, she fought in the ring. By night, she gained the trust of older women, only to betray them in the worst way possible. Using her strength from years of wrestling, she overpowered them with ease. Her past fueled her rage. She blamed elderly women for the hardships she had suffered in life. In total, at least 16 lives were lost at her hands. For years, she remained one step ahead of the law. But in 2006, she made a fatal mistake. She was caught leaving the scene of her final crime. Witnesses identified her, and when the truth came out, the entire country was stunned. Juana Barraza, the wrestler, was actually La Mataviejitas, the little old lady killer. She was sentenced to 759 years in prison, but to this day, her story remains one of the most disturbing cases in wrestling history. She wasn't just a performer, she was a nightmare hidden in plain sight.